So, so what I was saying, Carlos, was that I'm thinking back to the original evaluation that we did before we deployed the core, and we had some use cases that I think we wanted, that the Semantic Tech Committee had identified that we wanted to be able to support. And I'm not sure that anything's been done, and this is in no way meant as a criticism or anything, but just I think that it would be valuable. So some of the things that pop into my head right now are, and I know there's real incentive for this one because the machine learning cluster is now up and running, and they have this use case, which is tagging things, right? So we had talked about being able to annotate documents originally using ontologies that are in the core, for example. The machine learning cluster has use cases involving tagging data sets. And again, we want to be able to use controlled vocabularies and ontology concepts in that tagging.
Yes.
And so that's a use case. I don't know, what exactly we want to say that the core should do here, but if I still feel like there's a disconnect between what we on the ontology side, the ontologists are doing, and the people that we're trying to support ultimately out there, the scientists and maybe even the data repositories and the non-ontologists, right? The people that are still going, yeah, I keep hearing all this talk about ontologies. I mean, I guess, Louis, am I wrong that your session yesterday, the suite alignment session was attended by some people that are, maybe ultimately end users.
Yes.
So if we could start engaging them on this aspect as well, I think it would be really valuable.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be some, users of whichever web resources that don't really care what the underlying infrastructure is, and that's okay because all we really do is provide we take care of all that, and they just utilize whatever resources that they want to utilize. That we're never, these people are not going to be contributors.
Are they utilizing them though? That's what I guess I'm wondering is, who's utilizing the core other than ontologists?
Okay. No, I don't think anybody, to be honest with you.
Right, and so
well, see, the thing is right now is that what I think is happening, Annie, is there's not much information coming in as to how people are actively using it, but I can guarantee you people are actively using it. And the reason I'm able to say that was Carlos and I were talking earlier on the week about particular behaviour and applications and response codes from the server. So I looked at the HTTPD log, and there's a log streaming in, and there's, resources contained within COR have been accessed. There's no doubt about it.
Oh.
We just don't have we don't mine those logs or anything like that. So we don't, I suppose we could get to a stage where we say, we had so many hits in the last whatever. Most of the use cases have been, from what I understand, have been people browsing using the web application. But I think there are other applications which are not via the web browser.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, if I'm wrong, that's great. I worry a lot about a lot of energy going into maintaining ontology kinds of things that only ontologists are using. I guess my worry is, what is the value of having a lot of ontologies available to people if nobody's actually making use of them? And so my question, I guess, is, are there things we could do with the core itself that would make it more attractive to the kinds of end users for whom we think ontologies are valuable?
Yes, except that it would be good if we actually sort of like started the meeting at some point, just rather than starting the meeting without starting the meeting.
So
I think we could do it just as well.
I just put, if you go to Sketch in our session, I just put a link to a Google Doc, and I'm going to find where our one is used meeting last year, but I can record, and if you want to put an agenda item in there, let me make sure it's, refresh that, the list, just refresh that page. Yeah, notes here, right there. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, great. Meeting officially started?
Yes, introduce yourself and we will likewise. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Was the other stuff recorded or no?
Everything's recorded.
Okay, great. So Kai Blumberg here, junior developer for the environment ontology. And I do want to say, I can't speak to the resources in COR or Suite because I'm not a direct developer on them, but I can say that resources such as Envo are pretty widely used in life science community. And I think that the goal is really to kind of bridge the gap. I don't think that we as the like OBO people, we don't want to force OBO on everyone and like, oh, this is, because it is like a life science centric thing. What would be one good outcome that like kind of Pierre is maybe looking more toward is having, if possible, kind of something parallel to OBO that's within ESIP or the earth sciences that could actually help to leverage, make OBO go the right way too, in a sense. So there's a certain amount of like strategy here, but basically that if we could have earth science users in a community, the thing is it's always hard to generate a community that needs the thing. So I don't know what the best first steps are. It's like kind of cart before the horse problem. Like we don't want everyone to feel compelled to use something like Envo, but at the same time, it would be good to have something here, but maybe you don't have enough users who are using it. I think that there's probably a lot of legacy data that's annotated with Suite. If I'm not mistaken, Lewis, there's a lot of like old.
Yeah, I mean, for example, there's stuff, if you look at OGC documentation, there's a whole bunch of, Suite is peppered through a whole bunch of OGC standards, and it's the outdated stuff. That's something that we're wanting to come round to a bit later on. John and I were talking about how we think we can get best use of the next, 80 minutes, it is now, or maybe 75 minutes. But yeah, there's Suite, people have come to me from over in Australia, colleagues of Simon Cox. There's people utilising Suite. There's absolutely no doubt about it, right? Through COR, yeah, through COR. But one of the things that they're so what I don't want to do here is focus on Suite for this meeting. I don't think that we're going to best serve our time by doing that. I think the best thing for us to try and do here is to set a strategy for what are the things we need to do moving forward to lower the barrier to people interacting with COR for use cases.
Yeah,
right.
I think it would be great if we had clarity. Well, I don't have clarity. Maybe you guys do, and you could set me straight. I don't have clarity about what our objective is with COR, right? And so I think it would be useful to talk about that. And because I think if Kai, did I understand you correctly that you are suggesting that perhaps OBO is already doing what COR is trying to do, or are you suggesting something else?
No, not at all. So I understand that these legacy systems have some baggage. OBO is in a biological framework, a biological context. It has a certain upper level ontology by which it models the world. As pragmatic developer of Envo, which is part of that, I don't want to say to the earth science community, you have to use our thing. Like that's not what I want to say at all. I would prefer there to be something that works within the earth science community that's kind of like an analogy to Suite. So if COR could become, sorry, an analogy to OBO. Sorry. Let me, so if,
We need to be careful about not conflating Suite and COR.
yeah, sorry. But if COR could kind of function like a set of ontologies in a similar way that OBO functions as a set of ontologies for the earth science disciplines, it could benefit both the earth and life science disciplines. That's kind of communities overall in the end game. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make.
So one objective might be to try to make them work together in some way, or is that not necessary? You just mean that maybe there should be, that COR should be a thing that functions much like, for the earth science community, functions much like OBO functions for the biological sciences?
That would be kind of one possible outcome. That's kind of like what I'm suggesting would be a cool outcome. And then in the meantime, in the back end, we can build and continue to work. I know that Lewis and also Chris Mungle from Berkeley National Labs have been like working in the back end to like link Envo and suite terms. So I think that like those bridges can be built and those things can be done in the background, but to just kind of like represent the diverse like stakeholder communities, because I can imagine that earth science people are gonna not necessarily like look to OBO like, oh, why is that something that I should put my data in? I don't know, like this is.
So, yeah, so Lewis, again, I guess I still do have this question in in the back of my head, which is when you say lots of people are accessing suite through core, who are those people?
Well, I mean,
Are they people like, repositories using it to?
the honest truth is, right now we don't gather any of that information, so we haven't got a clue. I mean, it's the same type of thing you'll ask when you say like who accesses NASA's Earth data.
Mhm.
I mean, they really don't know,
know.
right? That's the honest truth. But they know that they get
Yeah.
downloads. I mean, I don't think we really need to be bothered with like who's accessing it. To be honest with you, we just need to make sure that that we make it easy for people to potentially build applications.
The thing I think we need to be bothered with is not that, yeah, I don't want to harp on who exactly is using it, but I think you get support and you get momentum if it turns out that there are a lot of end users out there who are finding value from having access to ontologies through COR.
Mhm.
If the only people that are accessing ontologies through COR are ontologists, adding more ontologies and adding more terms to ontologies, then we're not providing any value to anybody except ourselves. And then we'll never get the kind of support that we might need or the kind of momentum that we need to make this a thing.
Yeah, I absolutely get it.
And so I guess I am not clear about whether we're doing that at all right now, or whether
Yeah.
we really are just the self-licking ice cream cone.
Correct.
I
mean, there's always going to be a portion of this. I mean, the system came from the community, so there's always going to be a portion of this which is somewhat self-serving, right? Because it currently reflects what some of us have needed to do with it. I mean, it's as simple as that. So there's always going to be that portion of it there. We do have some questions in the audience here, and the thing is, I'm glad that Mark's here because Mark doesn't use COR, but does a whole bunch of work in this field.
We have a few new people here too, so
Yes.
I'd like you all to introduce yourself the first time you talk.
Hi, I'm Mark Schildhauer from NCES, the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, and Data One, as well as the NSF Arctic Data Center, all from UC Santa Barbara. And so I just wanted to say, I'm kind of reiterating, I think what you're getting at, Beth. I'm not clear if COR is intended to be a repository or the repository for suite. So that's one confusion that I have. And if it's intended to be larger than just for suite, it has to look ahead to the potential types of axioms and constraints and other things that, if you go to BioPortal, it's sort of the opposite problem. There's a gazillion different design patterns and usages in there. So there's a benefit of COR right now really being focused on suite, but there's also a need. I'm at an ecology center. We are right there bridging earth and life sciences. We're concerned with biospheric issues. So OBO Foundry, the extension in OBO Foundry of particular interest to us is certainly Envo. But we like the fact that in that community, we can directly link to the growing amount of genomic, metagenomic, biomedical data, because ecologists are concerned with environmental health impacts on nature and people, right? So these are some of my confusions, but the thing I'm most excited and optimistic about is that Suite and Envo maintain this growing association. I mean, it's just wonderful. And then I'm happy, if I've got clients more on the earth science side, they'll probably be looking COR-ish. If they're a bit more on the life science side, where nature's just context, they'll probably be going to BioPortal or Ontology. But that connection all the way from Earth through to life sciences is critical to me.
Okay.
And I think the Suite and Envo alignment, that's the solution I'm just extremely excited about.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the questions you had there was you were confused about whether it was just set up for Suite. The honest answer is no, it's not just set up for Suite. It's a technology stack that facilitates the linked data aspect of Suite, to serve Suite as linked data. That's the only real tie to Suite. Suite is probably, I mean, it's in BioPortal as well. It's in a number of other places. However, all that makes COR facilitate, the COR service stack facilitates you hitting a Suite URI and getting to somewhere which gives you a response, right? That's all it's set up for.
And when you say that facilitates the Suite URI, it facilitates any ontology who wants to use it the same way Suite does.
Correct.
The reason there's any confusion at all is because the biggest user of COR and embracer and advertiser, I would say, of COR has been Lewis, who's working on Suite.
Right.
And so it looks dominant in the conversation because it is, because he's the
Right.
dominant user. But
Right.
everything he's done, anyone else can do.
Anybody else can do. For example, I had tried a while back to come to get this effort all around, and I think, Beth, this maybe goes a lot to the type of stuff that you're talking about here, right? This would not be a self-serving project for the semantic technologies community, and it's this concept of linked data as a service, right? Where you've got something that you want to represent, right? You either have already a URI which you want to begin to build resources at, and then you essentially come to us and say, I own this domain namespace, set it up in your servers so that when I hit this end space, it resolves with this namespace, it resolves to COR. I persist my stuff in COR and I can now serve it as linked data, right? That's a very, very simple way for people to bring knowledge resources, should they wish, and for us to use an existing technology stack with very little additional configuration in order to serve their data as linked data. Simple as that, right? This didn't get off the ground. Nobody's really picked it up. But I think it would be kind of useful to clarify the position that COR is not just a software stack dedicated solely to Suite at all. It isn't. So
That is the sole ontology.
well, it's
No,
a
not
large,
at all.
it's a significant portion of the content that's there, but it's certainly not the only one, the only ontology suite that's there. I would say there are maybe 100 or 200 other resources in there.
It only looks significant because they stick every single little piece of it in as a separate ontology.
Right.
So it looks dominant, but if you just look at that as one ontology, it's not the majority. It's not close to the majority.
Right. There are a number of hundreds of other resources that are in there, no doubt about it. So actually, when you look at if you take, there's a SparkUL interface to anything that's in COR. So it's actually quite a rich underlying database that's there for bits and pieces. And we also think that we can federate things from between COR and MMI and wherever else. It becomes a much richer resource. So I think in terms of what COR currently represents is a contribution towards a growing capability of persistent earth science linked data. I think it actually contributes quite a significant portion of that right now, to be honest with you. But anyway, so there are obviously concerns here about what we have been doing and what we continue to do, and I'll be honest with you, what we have been doing has actually been pretty minimal, and I don't mean that in a bad sense. It's somewhat good that we've had to do very little. I think it shows the stability of the stack and of the service that we've not really had to do too much. What that does mean with this software stack is that there's going to be issues in the future when we don't maintain dependencies and things like this, but that's the software stack itself. The way it runs right now is that it's reasonably stable. Beth, you had mentioned about these. You had mentioned, Beth, about these use cases and requirements. I mean, is it worth us? What we brought these use cases and requirements up when COR was going through, and this is clones, you can see this is clones from W3C. It was a way for us to try and formally represent some requirements for the system. But essentially what we came up with here was a bunch of requirements, okay, that we wanted the systems which were being evaluated to satisfy, okay. So we wanted it to have a user authentication system, an ontology upload mechanism, a UI for viewing existing resources, a UI for editing existing resources, version control, API documentation. Okay, right now I think COR satisfies a user authentication system, it does that. It satisfies an ontology upload mechanism, it does that, both through the user interface and the REST API. It satisfies the requirement to have a user interface for viewing existing resources. It doesn't satisfy having a UI for editing existing resources.
It doesn't satisfy what?
Having a user interface for editing existing resources.
To some level, to some extent, but limited, yes.
Okay, well, you know, we're part of the way we're part of the way there with that one. Version control, you know, I think is a bit of a kind of sticky one here. Well, actually, no, it does. It absolutely does. It does cover that requirement. It really does. And it does have API documentation. So in terms of the system satisfying these requirements, it actually does satisfy these requirements.
So Lewis, again, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but
Right.
these are not end user requirements, right? These are requirements for ontologists.
Absolutely, Beth. So what?
And I think until we have some use cases for end users and some requirements for what we expect what value we're going to deliver to some end users, we're just.
I get it. I get where you're coming from. So, okay. So with that in mind, we're saying that we do satisfy these requirements. These are requirements that are provided at the time. Nothing's changed from the community that's here to the community that produced these requirements. Nothing's changed. Where I think we can get to though is that if we review, so it wasn't just requirements, there was use cases which drove these requirements. That's the point, okay? And what we need to evaluate now is whether we have new use cases which constitute adding requirements to what the system should satisfy, because these are just very simple requirements. That's the way they were meant to be, but there's a use case which backs each one of these up. For example, editing, extending releases of new version ontology contributed by, right? So we gathered who wanted to say that. Full use case description, okay? I mean, these are pretty comprehensive. And if it doesn't, if these have changed, then what we task ourselves with is updating this document. This was never meant to be like a static document. It was meant to, the primary purpose was that it could be utilized for us to undertake evaluations of the underlying systems. If things have changed, for example, Mark, when we were talking in breakfast, you'd said, you know, we use BioPortal because X, Y, and Z. That's great. We're not, I don't think COR should try to shadow all of the functionality that BioPortal provides. I don't think that that's a useful task. We don't have that developer manpower either, to be quite honest with you. But I think that it might be worthwhile as capturing the use case and saying, if this would help us increase adoption of overall usage of the system, not just for one very particular thing, but overall adoption of the system, then let's consider adding it to our roster of requirements and see if we can implement it at some point in the future.
Well, I'd like to kind of second what Beth was suggesting, and I'd be even happy to help elaborate the use cases for end user researchers. Mm-hmm. Because right now, when you get a Puri, and a lot of them will dereference to Ontology, mm-hmm. in the case of Obo Foundry, mm-hmm. or in the case of my group, BioPortal. Mm-hmm. And what I tell all my users who are still having, by and large, a hard time understanding how linked data even works, and what's this URI, they need to be able to dereference that URI and get a good look at what that thing is. Mm-hmm. And it's something that we all say ontologies do. It's relationship to other things. Mm-hmm. And it's got to be a very friendly, almost a dictionary, a linked dictionary, Wikipedia-like view. Mm-hmm. So if there's something that that COR could do that would really make me much more enthusiastic about, dereferencing ontology terms that are stored in COR. It would be really figuring out at least one nice, if not a couple of nice set of user interfaces when a term is dereferenced.
Okay, Mark.
Well, you see, I mean, this is the problem, is there are competing, if you want to call it, alternative repos. Ontobee is only Oboe Foundry, so in order to join there, you have to agree to all their orthogonality and all that stuff, much of which I think is good. Like I like RO and Pato, but I'm not going to buy into the whole thing if some other group has, gotten their prefix approved and they're doing stuff. So I think this is really good for the earth sciences and the ESIP community, but it's lacking that critical dimension of utility to end user researchers.
I love all of this, and I just want to make a point of order. Sorry, just want to make a little point of order. We haven't actually had a chance to review our agenda and consider what we might talk about today.
Right.
And so I don't want to get into an hour discussion before we can decide if that's how we want to spend the time.
Yep, absolutely.
If you go to the core session and Sketch, just find it. There's a link for the notes. And so if you want to look at the agenda or have something added or participate in collaborative note taking, please go ahead and jump in there.
This is not to say, Mark, that the point's not taken. Right. I think that we do have a monthly core meeting, and I think that the best way that we could serve our time for those meetings moving forward is to capture updated use cases for the time being. I don't think that would be a bad next best move for us. And I think that satisfies some of, it provides clarity to people who potentially use the system as to whether or not what they want to use it for is being considered and potentially developed for, and it resolves this long running potential ambiguity or uncertainty within our existing community as to what the hell the thing's actually being used for in the first place.
Yes,
okay?
And I think that, I mean, we've got our sponsors, NASA, NOAA, USGS.
Yeah.
If we could convince them that this had value for them, I think, that would be a good thing. But I don't think anybody even knows about it, let alone feels that it's going to provide them value. And part of that is to say, if we could come up with some use cases that I could take back to NASA and be like, hey, there's this resource that will help us start introducing semantics at the data centers.
We need to add to the use cases. There's no doubt about it, Beth. We need the use cases that are up here just now. We've got 7 use cases. That's just what was gathered at that time. Okay.
Well, I do want to say there were end user use cases once upon a time. They've been.
Well, we need to, I would say
discarded.
And I'll lead the effort if somebody can point them.
Those are number item 4. Those are end user use cases.
Yeah, these are.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Thank you. But none of the requirements that were derived from those use cases.
No, these requirements were derived. So each requirement has a related use case. So this is the user authentication system, and it relates to user use case 4.6, which is contributed by Lean and Michael Hoons. Portal should provide both a GUI and Sparkle endpoint for accessing its functionality and its stored ontology and concepts. And what ended up happening was that this resulted in, we need to link that to the related requirement, but essentially that related to the subsequent evaluation of COR as satisfying that particular thing. That was what was done. So I think what we need to do is to get people like Mark and maybe others, literally directly invite you guys to the next COR meeting and try and capture some of, and it can be in the form of a 45-minute conversation, and from that we derive additional use cases. I mean, that's where I think we need to be. Okay, folks, with that being said.
Hey, Luis.
Carlos.
Yeah, I've been hearing all what you guys have been saying, and I think I agree for the most part. So in general, the use of the system from non-ontologies is a critical one.
Yes.
But I think we are forgetting about a specific aspect, which is development. So the core is not a finished product. It's something that needs improvement on several aspects. something that we have discussed in the past, and I think we have done a little bit of that this past year, but not as much as maybe we'd like to.
I agree, Carlos.
Intended. I remember, for example, you're trying with the Python client library, which is supposed to help with those end users that are not necessarily ontologists. So we have done a little bit of this and that, but it's like on a best effort basis. It's not that we have a group of developers agreeing on having discussions, moving forward, etc., etc. So we don't have that right now. As far as I can tell, we don't have that. We don't have that momentum that we were envisioning 1 or 2 years ago. It's kind of just moving by inertia, right? We just put now and then we capture some new issues or just a rehash of previous issues. That's all that we have done for a long time now. So I think we are forgetting about that key critical aspect in my view.
If we had end user engagement, though, you might get other developers starting to contribute on that side of it. Because right now the developers that are contributing are more on the ontologist side of things.
Yes, I agree.
And that's, partly why that development is proceeding, but the other type of development isn't proceeding.
We've essentially arrived at a chicken and egg issue here, I think, where without growing the community, we don't have confirmation that the service is useful, properly useful, outside of the fact that it serves suite. The answer to that is that it does these things, but people just don't have that clarity. But anyway, so Carlos, you're absolutely right there. And the way that we wanted to run the meeting, to be honest with you, was to show what work has gone into developing client-facing tooling to interact with COR. We did, and so I think we should go there for the next. So we're at half an hour. I think we've got another hour to go. I think we kind of. I recognised that there was going to be a discussion on what state things are currently in, and I think that's fine. That's healthy. Because, by the way, this is more participation than we get at the COR meetings anyway, so it's fine. So anyway, as Carlos was saying, what we wanted to do here was we recognised a while back that without providing any tooling at all, I mean, this is so obvious, but without providing the tooling for COR, that expecting uptake was not happening. So John, myself, Carlos, we kind of started hashing this out and recognised that toolkits in various languages would be useful. So because of the way in which COR was implemented using the Open API specification, we can auto-generate client toolkits in a variety of languages. So what we did was we generated a toolkit in Python, which is under the ESIT Federation. It's open source code. It's not available. You can't install it via packaging manager yet, but that's easy to do. All we would need to do is push it into like PyPy or Conda or something like this. But what we have here is essentially the toolkit itself. Automated document generation about how to install it locally. And then essentially what you need to do in order to get started with it, right? And this is just basic Python code. It shows how you would configure a username and password in order to interact with the service, but you don't need a username and password. It shows how you construct some utility functionality and then post essentially an object, post a file, post some ontology to the service, okay? It shows you all the endpoints, the Python functions that you need that you can use. And this is basically, an API which is ready to be used, okay? So what we did was Carlos put together some demo, which is Python demo. It just directly utilizes the toolkit. And you can see here very quickly, a very simple Python file that essentially, again, creates the utility functionality. What we do is we do a get on each ontology resource that is in COR. And there's hundreds and hundreds of resources come back here. We do a get for an individual ontology and find information about that. And you can see, I mean, this API is really, really simple. You're talking like one line of code in order to get what you're trying to get. You print the response for that. You can print responses about, you can get information about organizations in which people are registered in the system which belong to those organizations. And then we can do stuff like term searches as well. So everybody's always saying like, oh, what's in there? You know, I don't know what's in there. Well, here we can do a very flexible query that enables us to say, well, I want to query for something containing this particular text. And you can also refine it to in which part of the triple it's in. You could say, I want this only in subject or only in the object, or maybe it's a linkage. So I would want it there. And it could be a namespace, for example. It could be a data type property. It could be a range or whatever you'd want it to be. So this is just very, very simple showing how to do that.
So the use case is that that your demo here is demonstrating is a kind of human exploration.
Human exploration, a discovery portion. I would refer to it probably as a discovery portion. I don't know too much of what's in there. So let me, for the time being, execute some arbitrary queries that would give me a feel for what's in the underlying knowledge source, resource, what's there. That's it, Simon. It's just.
So this isn't something that, I mean, these demos, but you know what underneath it is there something that would be more likely to be used in an operation.
Absolutely. So let's go on to that next.
Are you going to run it?
So essentially, yes.
That was what we call in Australia.
So let me just see this.
Actually, while you bring it up, can I get our new people to introduce themselves?
Yes, absolutely.
And I will too. So I'm John Grabio. I'm the one of the people who initiated the core development now at Stanford University. Say you are in what your interest in core is?
Hi there, I'm Connor Scully Allison, and I'm a student fellow. I'm actually facilitating this. Yes, to help you guys out with tech. You guys don't need anything though, so you're good. Otherwise, though, I'm just generally interested in ontologies, and I think that this is a fascinating discussion.
You had a labs project as well, right?
Yes, exactly.
So explain a little bit about that, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, yeah. I was funded. It wasn't an ESIP lab, but it was a Funding Friday last year.
Yep.
Yeah, but similar. I was funded to do a project which involved using an ontology or ontologies to develop cyber infrastructure on the back end, like automatically. So you take this machine readable language and you run it through sort of a compiler of sorts that spits out microservices and databases as well. Mm-hmm. And I actually saw a lot of success with how that played out, and I'm still working on how to expand it from where I am now.
Hi, my name is Abdullah Lawerdi. I'm a PhD researcher from University of Idaho. I'm doing gathering the ontology to do the FAIR principles, taking care of the one of the ESIP projects, the fairtool.org. And I'm a computer science background. Mm-hmm. And interested in the ontology engineering, mm-hmm, to build infrastructure for the data science. Thank you.
So what I think what core potentially represents is a stack, a software stack, which potentially you could utilize in some of your applications moving forward. So, hopefully from today. And by the way, as I've mentioned, there's plenty of other examples out there, RoboFoundry and things of stacks, so other software stacks that you can access, just as easily as you could probably access core. But what we're covering today, is maybe a newcomer. Core is a service which runs at ESIP. It was developed within the semantic technologies community at ESIP. And it's maintained basically by some of the people in the room and Carlos online. It's free to use. And essentially, you know, that's it. What we're trying to show here is what are the plans moving forward for the Ontology repository as a software, as a community-led, community-serving piece of software at the ESIP Federation. That's what we're trying to do today.
I'm using something called Vetro.
Vetro?
Yeah, which is the a tool that the Vivo is the like knowledge semantic web infrastructure for. They use Vetro to build that application.
Okay, got it.
But it is like a Cornell University product.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so thanks for some of the context. Okay.
I'll take a look at the core and I'll discover it.
No problem. So basically, the first part of this meeting was kind of a discussion about where we're at. What we're trying to do now is go through some tooling. So hopefully this part is useful for folks that maybe know about COR or don't know about COR, and definitely don't know about how to use it really, particularly from within client libraries. So this is functionality that you'd build into an application. We've covered a portion. This part right here is assuming that you're wanting to do some discovery of resources that are inside COR. You've got an option to go to a user interface, graphical user interface, a web application, and do some discovery in there. There's also some other richer functionality there. There's a Sparkle endpoint which you could query for. But I think one of the issues we recognise is that we have a large jump from between arbitrary discovery within a web application and then a rich query language which is away over here. These are a huge void apart. So what we're trying to do is build some simple tooling, or provide some simple tooling which bridges that gap. That's really where we're at just now.
Yeah. Also, I'm using Protege.
Yes.
For engineering. And I know that Protege, it has the facility to produce all doc.
Yes.
That will translate any ontology to like HTML
yes.
Documentation.
Yes.
Maybe you can use.
And I'll just catch Sky Bristol, who just came in as well. Just to say very briefly who you are and your interest in COR.
Sure. I'm Sky Bristol with the USGS. We have the need to use this kind of a repository for a number of ontologies that we have developed in our space that need to go somewhere where we can have an online instantiation of them.
Yeah. Do you work with
I'd like to ask.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
But she's busy, so we'll come back to that.
No bother, no bother. Okay, so you'd said like, can you run it? So this is some very simple Python code. So I mean, let's go ahead. So essentially what we've got here is, actually I'm just going to print this to a file out, 2 seconds. This will save a bit of time anyway. It's running the Python functionality, which is provided here, right? All we're trying to do here is get information on all the ontologies which are present, get information on an individual resource, and then get information on organizations. And I tried to run this last night. I don't know, something wrong with my environment, but term seems to be timing out. So essentially, when we look at what's been generated, we can see here that in each record, okay, we just got a JSON response for each record. Very basic stuff, which is the IRI, if one exists. I think there's potentially a bug in that part of this code as well. IRI should be name of the ontology that was registered within the system. That's either provided directly by the user when they manually enter that information, or it's picked up from within the ontology file by COR itself. The owner, the status which is essentially an enum. The ontology can go through various phases of a life cycle between being through development, testing, stable, unstable, deprecated, I think, etc. We talked about version control, so there is a date timestamp associated with the ontology. This is when it was ingested into COR, I believe. The visibility, again, if we were to use a username password-based authentication here, and you've got resources in there that you would wish to remain private, then there's that level of functionality as well. And that's just very basic information, right? Again, we've got stuff on organizations. There we go. So you can see RQ XTOMS is in there. We've got a test organization for just running basic tests against. ESIP Federation is in there, W3C, ACME, NASA JPL, Suite, NASA GCMD, OBO Foundry, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff in there, and there's various data providers. The last one here is actually the ESIP linked data notifications, right? So this is kind of something that I try to build out to provide an additional use case for somebody that maybe want to utilize Suite as a knowledge repository for any events that they have going on, potentially, or just any kind of notification that they want to post. So this is the type of thing. I mean, we don't need to spend too much time here. This is just showing that, essentially in one API call, you can get some information back. So I kind of want to introduce you to this linked data notifications, not because I want you to use linked data notifications, just because it's another example of how you could build an application on top of COR. And I think it's a reasonable demonstration of that. So linked data notifications, just to give you an introduction to them, they're essentially notifications which embraces the linked data principles in order for people to post arbitrary messages to an inbox, and for other people to potentially subscribe to topics within that inbox and receive notifications. So for example, say I have a data system that writes out products. Whenever a product that contains a certain scientific variable is written, I could write a linked data notification. Other people can subscribe to that, and they would know that my repository had maybe posted, my data system had produced a product with that particular variable. Kai, can we pass them? Where's the microphone gone? There we go.
Sorry, maybe just a stupid question, but how is that any different or better than just the GitHub notification?
There's absolutely nothing. This is linked data principles. So essentially, you're encoding your messages using URIs for representing your data formats, vocabulary for describing the content of those messages. Essentially, just embracing linked data principles for representing notifications. That's it. If they do that already in the GitHub API, then quite simply, there's no difference. Okay. Well, apart from the fact that GitHub's tied to GitHub, this is just arbitrary messaging. Okay, so that's all this is, and this isn't, as I said, this is not meant to be. You can take it as seriously as you want to. The point of this is it's a demonstration of how to build an application on top of COR and what that actually entails. Okay, so essentially, I just want to say that I didn't write this from the scratch up, from the ground up. Sorry, this was forked and it was adapted to be able to build into COR. Okay. So it shows you what the features are. It says that it's a lightweight receiver for linked data notifications. So if you're able to generate linked data notifications, you can push those notifications into COR, and other people can then interpret them from then on. Okay. It's got this concept of an inbox as well, that you post to a particular inbox. Okay. There's a very basic configuration file which demonstrates the authentication portion of COR. You set it up very easily. And this actually runs on the same machine, the same software stack that COR runs on. So this is a persistent service that runs ESIP. So anyway, let's go over to the command line, and we'll have a crack at seeing if the service is up and running. So the service is up and running. We've got a 200 response, and this is basically to tell us that an inbox does exist and that that's the location of the inbox, okay? And you notice that I didn't try to post for the inbox, I just tried to post for the linked data notification endpoint, okay? Maybe make that slightly, okay. So you can request a list of notification URLs that it contains. So these are from within the inbox URI, okay, that we got in the previous message. You can then go and get a list of messages which are in the inbox. So essentially what we're returned here is the fact that we have an inbox that's of type basic container and that it contains various messages. Each one of these here is a message which is in the inbox, okay? We can go and check those out in a minute, and then it gives some basic information about, you know, kind of what this is. So essentially what's happening here is we have a very thin REST API that just persists all of this linked data information into COR, and then COR enables us to serve that information, right, to wherever we really want to. So you've got this is the scenario here is that you have a provider of information. The linked data notification service is the receiver, and then you can have subscribers to those messages, whatever they are. And then if I go in and have a look at an individual message, you can post new notifications. So if I, for example, wanted to post a message, it's an example of how to do that here. And then if you want to retrieve the content of brand new notifications that you'd posted, then I think I had an actual example here. Then you can go ahead and do that. So this was a notification that I posted, and it was basically just about information about the Empire State Building, right? Where we've got a description, we've got the geographic coordinates for where it's located. There's an image and there's a name.
Lewis,
John?
people haven't seen COR yet in this whole
Absolutely.
day. So maybe you could actually bring
I sure will. So if we go to where these notifications, what these notifications are, then COR is directly serving this message here. This is, of course, the JSON LD representation of it. But if you were to go into COR itself, core.esipfed.org, you access the COR, and you search here for LDN, linked data notification. You can see that there's the inbox graph, which itself tells you which messages are in the inbox. And then you've got the individual linked data notifications themselves, okay? So let's check on this one here, and this is the exact same message, but in this tabular, exactly triples, tabular format, where we have the lat long geolocation, the description, the name, the location of an image. So this here is an example of a Python client inbox receiver, which enables you to interact, post, and retrieve messages from COR. Okay, it's a different use case, entirely different use case from somebody merely posting ontologies there and then looking for terms and definitions and things like that. So it's just a different application. Okay, that's kind of all I really wanted to show with that, to be honest with you. Sky, we've got a question up the back there, Sky.
So can you describe a real world use case where you see this thing playing out?
Definitely.
By using the COR as a repository where this stuff is going to live permanently, kind of.
Absolutely. I can actually. So one of the things I was thinking about was, and I should have really prepared this query because I think it's quite an interesting one. I was talking to John about it at breakfast this morning. So we had an event on Monday, right, which was the Geosemantics Symposium. And say we published a linked data document which described the event and described the people that were there. And it maybe included, I don't know, like their surname, okay, their last name. There's no reason why we couldn't, from that linked data notification, easily utilize the COR Sparkle endpoint to then go over to the AGU knowledge graph and say, for the participants at our event that happened on Monday, I want to see abstracts that's been published at AGU in the last 2 years, say, and give me the topics of those abstracts that have been tagged. So before I know it, and then from the papers that have been tagged, let me try and filter on anything that says the word semantics, ontology, whatever. So therefore, I know now that Mark has been running workshops potentially, and that some of those workshops have been advertised at AGU via some of his publications. That there would be an example of us publishing linked data notifications about events that happen at ESIP, and then very easily you're able to federate a query which enables you to join information from a third party, non-ESIP, but ESIP affiliated data provider, which is AGU for their knowledge graph. And then I can begin to do some literature review about the kind of stuff that Mark does in his day-to-day work. So, Sky.
Yeah, so I mean, that makes sense. So sort of like a continuous spooling application that we would spool knowledge into from activities and events and things that are going on across ESIP. So, I mean, why not though, I mean, leverage, you know, something like SQS or SNS or RabbitMQ or something else that we wanted to throw on here in addition, I mean, as the actual messaging platform, and then just structure things in JSON LD and Cosmet.
I see absolutely no problem with that either. I see absolutely no problem with that. What we're talking about here is this is an application which is not built for scale, which is certainly not built as to probably be considered as a production ready system. It's merely a development effort. And there's absolutely no way why you couldn't just utilize, you know, the same components on Amazon SQS or, you know, a RabbitMQ server to buffer those messages and send, and then you can pull from that queue, and then you could, you know, do something similar over there. There's absolutely there's no difference. I'm not saying utilize this. All I'm saying is, you know, this is maybe 40 lines of Python code, 50 lines of Python code for the entire server.
Yeah, I mean, but it seems like the really interesting development around this would be to work on the listeners, essentially, the things that are going to sit there and go, oh, I've got these new messages showing up. What are we going to do with them? What are we going to, you know, create?
Absolutely,
so,
absolutely. Okay. Yeah, I completely agree, Sky, thanks.
Can you display the data in LODE format?
Yeah, I knew that was going to come round. Basically, what's happened is what we have in this load just now is I believe that service there, we delegate this to an external service, and I believe that this instance of that service is currently down. So the short answer right now is no. And John realised that this morning. So I mean, what I can do is I can click on this, and it will try to. Yes, this. I mean, this is down. That service is not.
It's quite unstable.
Yeah.
And I just put in the Slack a link to a replacement in Python.
Beautiful. Yeah.
They have a new repository in Australia.
Okay. That's where we're at. So I mean, that's an easy fix. I wasn't aware of that because I don't utilize this capability within COR, right? In the last week, it's come out that, you know, or I think even today or yesterday or whenever it was, this week, I should say, it's come out that this is a part of COR that needs to be updated. This is a very simple fix. This is like a one-line fix, right? So we'll get that done. So anyway,
Coming up on 11.
Yes, I know we're kind of rapidly losing time here. The point of this here, folks, is to demonstrate that we haven't not been doing anything. There's stuff that has been done. We're providing client toolkits to interact with COR now. If your software stack's Java based or you write code in Ruby or something, we can generate toolkits for those as well. We've got an example of this linked data notifications service up and running. It's not really being used. The reason why we put this up was Tom Narrock had mentioned that he was potentially using linked data notifications for over in the climate, I believe it was the climate resilience cluster, where they were posting resilient or events based on flooding, hurricanes and things like this. And this was going to be the format that they use for the messaging system. So I just implemented this to show Tom that potentially he doesn't need to go and write this bit of infrastructure over here. If he's got a lightweight concept that he wants to try and prove, then he can just leverage this stuff and he could prove that concept. But anyway, so that's what we managed to cover here just now. I think, is it fair to say, John, that we're trying to move on just now and let's do some strategic kind of planning for where we want to be in the next, you know, between now and the ESIP winter meeting?
Yes, what we thought would be really valuable is to hear from you all collectively about needs that you have identified from using COR, things that you would like to see from COR. As Beth was just illuminating at the beginning of the discussion, there's high value in being able to show real world use cases and real world users. And so to the extent you either have a proposition for what we need to do in order to make COR more attractive to real world users, or you know of some things that are central that are missing from your standpoint as a user, we'd love to collect those kinds of feedback now for, say, 15 minutes. And we can do short discussions of any particular issue or question, but we don't want to dive too deep into that just for time reasons.
Right. So yeah, we've got until 11:30. We've got 30 minutes to hash this out, folks. This hasn't actually gone too badly. I thought we were going to sit here for the full 90 minutes complaining about, you know, who's using COR. we managed to get. No. I mean, to be honest with you, I was almost there as well, Beth. And I thought when I got up this morning, I thought, you know, I can't turn up and do that. And I'm glad we haven't. I mean, half an hour and that's fine. You know, that's half an hour on some applications, and then this is how we move on over the next 6 months. I think this session's, you know, the structure's not too bad.
So this, at the risk of sounding redundant about what we've already discussed, is the vision of COR to service an end user research scientist client? Because everything you've shown has been, you know, you're throwing up Python code and talking about LD. It's nothing that the researchers, except for ESIP style researchers, there's a lot of them that, you know, they just want it in their face. They want to go to a website and see stuff. And maybe I haven't been able to view load. I've been trying, but and maybe that's it. But, you know, an example of what I'm talking about is if you go to the EMBL OLS, right? It's really nice. And it's the same thing with OntoB and BioPortal. And COR doesn't have, I couldn't even figure out actually how to fix the column widths on the triple display, the base triple display.
To see what you're looking at, see what the IRI is you're looking at.
So if it is part of the vision to accommodate directly an end user research scientist who's engaging with linked data in the semantic web, then that's exciting, and I'd like to help develop use cases. And it is. Okay, so good. So then what you just were saying when you were showing the LDN was this idea that, you know, we're trying to conform our measurements, in particular in data, to these various observation and measurement standards, right? So that's a whole nother level of design pattern, right? SOSA and SSN and that we are then using terms from Suite or Envo, but we're orchestrating them into an observations and measurements design pattern. So exactly, but it's hard to figure out how do you provide that to an end user so they can understand the entities and properties of what they're viewing. This is what some of these visualizations in OLS provide for you. That's in there. That's, I think, a really ripe area for COR to work on. And also named graphs. So you gave a use case example of workshops at AGU and being able to learn a lot through it. So if we have some mechanism that is COR going to be an ontology repository, or is it also going to be a more generalized triple store that will accept, maybe through some authentication, named graphs that are basically articulations of scenarios like you just said could be communicated through LDN?
John, we've just, on you go, John, because this is great because we've discussed a large part of this.
Yeah, I'm going to take one step back before I go there.
And I also have some comments.
Oh, good, Carlos, thank you. And maybe some of mine will feed some of yours. So COR came into existence as a terminology repository, an ontology repository that would be of benefit to the earth science community. And myself, Carlos, Annie, Lewis, and others have been involved in bringing it forward into the form that we see it now, which is an unfinished form.
Yeah.
So when you offer a tool like this, it can be used a lot of different ways. I would not have expected it to be used for, let's say, message pub sub type applications. And I would be concerned about it being used that way extensively because it's a little bit partly because it's orthogonal the way I thought of it, and partly because it's orthogonal to, I think, where the development direction needs to go. But I think it's an open discussion. And more than likely, if that were to turn into an important part of it, I would say let's split that part off and have two repositories, one that does that kind of thing and one that does the vocabulary, so that they don't interfere with each other for the attention of the viewer, right?
Yep.
And the last thing I'll say about that is that as we've seen with the other MMI repository, people can go in and use it for different kinds of things. And I think we don't want to close off investigatory uses of it as long as they're not interfering with primary uses, is the broader statement I'd make. I think it's really nice to have places like this that you can demonstrate with rapid turnaround interfaces and other things. Carlos, do you want to jump in there?
Sure. Yes. Regarding Mark's question about what's the COR or the software itself going to provide in terms of use, I will say that it's more an enabler. So we should focus on the backend API. In fact, the interface is just one more client, right? The COR web interface is just one client of that backend API. Now we should think more in terms of API enabled new user interfaces. Some of those will be more focused on the actual end user, which is not an ontologist at all. We should try to get attention from potential developers that want to address that aspect, which, so again, it's going to use the API to enable maybe tagging here, maybe cross references there, things like that that are more at the very end of the spectrum in terms of uses and use cases.
So purpose-built front ends.
Yes, I think I have said this in the past. My interest is more like in the back end. So of course, we know that there are a lot of usability improvements to be done on the UI, but I'm thinking already about new interfaces. You know, this is moving so fast. This is an area, you know, the whole UX community is growing, and there are so many works about how to improve usability depending on the user, and there is a lot of work to do there. So somebody needs to step in and start doing things in that direction. But at least personally, from my side, I will be more interested in making the backend more robust, more capable. We know there are some performance little issues that eventually may become a bottleneck if more people start to use the backend. So I think we need to split the interest. If we have enough interest, we should focus, some of the folks should focus on the backend, and some of them should focus on the UIs and all these usability things. And among of those, there should be some people working on actual integration with web applications or tools, even Protege or something like that, that maybe there are front ends on top of that that are addressing more casual users than ontologists. But to summarize, I think there is work to do on so many fronts, and we need to start thinking about how to engage people to help with those different fronts. I'm not trying to invent or reinvent everything. No, if there are things out there that are ready to go, we should try to see a way to integrate with those and leverage what is already done. And this is an area that is moving so fast. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of things to learn from other efforts out there.
Yeah, Carlos and myself kind of share the interest in the server-side code, the back-end code. That's why him and I have been kind of bouncing off each other the last while and making some improvements in that regard. You know, Mark, you've made some excellent points even just now, and we've discovered like a bug in the front end code. The reason why that stuff is happening is because, and it's like that, is because, you know, Carlos and myself, I don't really have a particular interest in the user interface, if I'm quite honest with you. But that's a shallow point of view, because that's where a lot of people come from. Sky up the back here. Sky up the back here is trying to ask you some question. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm gonna go first, and then if it's okay, I'll
Yep.
go like that. What I heard very clearly, and I happen to agree with it, so I'm going to repeat it and maybe shorten some of the follow-on things. In the first part of our discussion today is that I don't know that we have a crisis, because I still feel like it's early days and we knew we wouldn't have a lot of resources, but we have a need to attract more users, as you said, Carlos. And what I heard and believe is that you're not going to attract more users by improving the back end, which is not to say I don't love you both for the work you're doing in all respects on the back end. And I do think that's critical. But we actually need to have a conscious plan that goes beyond somebody needs to come. Now, the problem we have is we all have ideas. I don't have time to implement them. We don't have a warm body to implement any of those ideas. So I wanted to put that down as the starting point. Many of us agree that we really need to bring people in by what we present in the user interface. Given that, and that we don't have a set of funds assigned to develop user interface improvements, yeah, we still have to think about that and where to go with it.
So there's a development issue, but there's also just a messaging, right, that we're also not doing. And so, you know, yes, of course we don't expect Luis and Carlos to do all the work. Get that back end whipped into shape, and but while you're at it, would you also think of the use cases, advertise to end users? I mean, I think, you know, where you get momentum, then you get people getting enthusiastic about doing the work, right? Carlos and Luis are enthusiastic about the back end. We've got it covered, but we don't have the front end covered. And it's partly because we're not sending a message, right? The message we send is that we're a self-flicking ice cream cone, that we're going to just keep on providing more and more capabilities for our ontologists and for more ontologies. And I've been doing this a long time. And when I started out, you know, we said, if we build them, they'll come. They are not coming, y'all. They're not coming. Until you put some capabilities on top of these ontologies, the rest of the world looks at them and goes, huh? Right? Would you build a relational database and put an endpoint up and say, go ahead and query my database? Nobody would do it because they don't know what's in there. They don't know what, you know, what it's supposed to be supporting. They don't know what your data model looks like. And for some reason, we think that's good enough with ontologies, that we can put a Sparkle endpoint out there and people are going to start querying it and do something with the results. You'll be lucky if you can get a query to answer anything at all if you don't know, you know, what's in there and what it's supposed to be supporting, what use case. So I really do think we need to put attention into writing the use cases, reaching out to the science community and saying, what are your pain points? And here's, you know, and letting them know how we could help them. And then they'll get their developers maybe helping out. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, please, that was great. Can I just like, and add to that, I totally agree. And I just like, can we just point to like in the OBO world, we actually have these like, you know, websites where you can go, you can point and click, you can find the terms, you see the definition right away. You know, it actually like kind of makes sense to people. And even with us, even with like in the genomics community where we have like the MIGS standards, which are like, okay, use ENVO whenever you sequence metagenomic data, provide these 3 terms from ENVO from these 3 hierarchies, please do that. Even in like with all that, it's still an effing challenge.
Yeah, a couple things maybe just to pile on just a little bit. Sorry. Yep. So actually this linked data notification thing for COR is one of the more interesting things about this whole thing that I've seen in quite a long time. I would just look at it in a little bit different way. I mean, for us, kind of operationally, you know, we want to go to a place, we want to have our code go to a place. Let me say, we're not that interested in having a fancy whiz-bang user interface, but we want our code to go to a community place, a registry place where we can look for the concepts that we need to link into our data building workflows when we don't have a clear understanding of what ontology we should be connecting to. So having a place to go consult is great. And then having a place to incrementally add our own knowledge for broader community consideration is also really interesting in that. So basically, if we go, we look, we don't find it, we being able to drop in a stub someplace through a message queuing kind of thing, and have that be something that we are asserting for ourselves, but have it sit there in a way that the rest of the community is notified to go look at what we've just done and potentially figure out if there's some broader connection to that thing in some way. In my view, that type of incremental real-time knowledge building is what a community ontology repository for ESIP should be doing functionally. And in that way, it's much more about the content and the stuff that we're putting into it and how we're using it and leveraging it than it is, you know, all of the deeper ramifications of the architecture of how it works and how we view it and everything else. So, I mean, if we can figure out a way to, I don't know, clarify that fundamental mission of this thing and make sure that all of the development that we are able to spend some time on is really leading to that, then I think we'll start getting uptake and we'll start getting people trying to use this. I mean, I have no interest in building this infrastructure just for USGS. I don't want to do that. This kind of stuff needs to be a community asset that we're constantly tapping into and contributing to in some way. So whatever we have to do to make that happen, I think that's what we got to do.
That's great. I think that's how we got this far. I'm reminded of with regard to what is this thing's mission. I'm reminded of the story of the professor who was teaching his students about sleep and said, we need to think about what the purpose of sleep is. And the students said, what's the purpose of being awake? And the answer is, there are a lot of purposes of being awake. There are probably a lot of purposes of sleep. I think there are a lot of functions this system supports. Part of the reason it's here, I think, is because of users like yourself who said, we need that interface that we can talk to. We don't need the UI so much, but we really need the tool, the back end to store this stuff. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to push back again on not thinking the UI is important. A lot of my clients say, what does this semantic stuff get us? And my answer is that when you see something, it enables you to figure out what it is, you know, what is that measurement? What is this data set about? And I say, and all you have to do is dereference, well, I try not to even use that term. You just go to the web and you click on it and you see something and you learn what it is about. I haven't seen that yet with COR.
All of us would agree it wasn't built to enable that in the next one.
So I've heard adjectives like, you know, whiz bang and sophisticated. It's like, no, just some simple stuff, just the definition. Yeah.
It's so hard to build such dumb things. No, you go ahead.
So for exploring ontologies, there's a number of routes to do that, and all the OBO ones point you to OntoB, I think. Yes. So what is it that OntoB offers that community, which, you know, a ESIP hosted service, you know, which aspects of that would need to be carried over? And this isn't a core question, this is more of a suite question. Why isn't suite in OntoB?
Because the rules for joining OntoB is you have to be an official OBO Foundry ontology. And I thought that you have to be committed. I'll bet that's a legacy statement. Yeah. I think that there's a commitment to orthogonality and reuse, right? And they've got a curation process of what's permitted. I think they're doing pretty well, right? Yeah. But I think that's a good idea, Simon, if we can leverage, you know, Ontology. I would certainly encourage people to dereference a suite term into BioPortal or Ontology as opposed to COR. Right now.
I feel like I need to give Louis response.
Hey,
First response.
Mark, this is Carlos again. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I just put a link in the chat, which is the link to the climate and forecast browser, standard names browser that we developed a few years ago, which is might be a simple example, but powerful example of a UI that focuses on one particular scope and provides some nice functionality to the end user in terms of finding those definitions very quickly. And this is powered by the backend. It's the same software that is behind COR. In this case, it's against the MMI instance, but that might be I'm just providing that as an example of things that are possible against a robust backend with somebody just addressing the aspect of usability in a particular context. Have you seen that tool, by the way, Mark? Is the what we call the CF standard names vocabulary browser? Maybe for everybody else. Yeah, you were asking, I just need an interface that I just search for something and I get the definition right away. This is a good example, I guess.
Yeah, as well as the mappings that are available to that thing in one or two other repositories.
Maybe you can show to the rest of the group really quick. Oh, sorry. Yes, you are doing that right now. Cool. Well, we have it's such a big font here. Okay.
Louis is letting people see it in the back of the room.
Okay.
It's the huge room thing.
Yeah, if you click one of those definitions, Louis, please, really quick here. Click anyone.
Sorry, Carlos. Go ahead again, please.
Yeah, like this
Carlos,
one. And you get... Yeah, this part is a little bit more to the expert user in terms of ontology aspects, but you get the idea that there are similar definitions, no, corresponding definitions in other repositories, in this case against the NERC server in the UK.
Yep.
Anyway,
hey, Carlos, again. Oh, go ahead.
No.
You can finish. Well, I was just going to ask, related to the, we want the end user, the user to work with us. So as a scientist, I think, okay, I have data, I want it to be out there, I want it to be documented. Do we think realistically that maybe the point where we are wanting to touch is the kind of the repository contact with the scientist? Because a scientist that's going to want to mark up their data with really great metadata and put it out there isn't going to host, very rarely is going to host their own repository of data. They're going to need to work with someone to serve their data to the community. And it's those people that would probably have the knowledge of this more than an individual researcher. If you're an NSF funded researcher, you need to put your work in an NSF repository. And so at that point, you'll have a point of contact with someone that's at a repository that should be able to help you out with this stuff. So I just wonder, if it's not just the ontologist and the physical scientist, but if there's this other community and those are the folks rather than the working scientists.
Yeah, so one example I think of that might be NASA's upcoming UMMVAR representations, where in theory they're trying to do something that looks like Scott Peckham's CSDMS variable names, that I actually sent an email while we were in the, I don't know where we were, I don't know, sometime this week to them saying we should use the terms from the sensor network ontology, feature of interest, right? So the UMMR is looking at, say, at sort of marking up individual data sets, variable level data sets by identifying the measurement object, the medium, and the quantity or the observed property. And so I suggested that we align with that terminology. But when you start plugging in the values for those, that's when you want to start looking into something like the COR to find the vocabulary term from ENVO or SUITE that you're going to put in there. If my feature of interest is black carbon aerosols, I want to use the URI. I'm talking about the DAX now, not the scientists. Yes, so sorry, I'm seconding what you're saying, that this, if the DAX had a tool that they could use to generate those metadata records that easily allowed them to plug in the values for these UMMVAR fields.
The scientists are our ultimate clients, but the proximate clients are the people who are building the tools which the scientists are more or less compelled or required or have an interest in using.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of clarity of language, when we're talking about who our user is, that clarifying that it's still the, it's, I mean, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it's like, so I think if you're thinking of a UI, if you're thinking of the back end, that I do think understand your client, and there is the person that's going to benefit, but then there are your actual users. And so if it is a more technically savvy, we're not thinking of, I mean, I think of the colleagues that I worked with at JPL, when they get to a certain point of a data set that needs to go into a DAC, they work with a DAC. It's not, they're not searching these things. And so that
the most trivial case is almost all of those drop-down lists in any user interface which a scientist potentially interacting with, whether it's metadata, whether it's grant submission, whether it's whatever, all of those drop-down lists should be accessing, you know, shared community vocabularies,
yep,
not rather than local ones. So that and you know, things like the COR provide an access point to those shared community vocabularies, an API and such like.
We could write a widget for that.
That should be the canonical dereferencing of the term in the ontology is a service that an ontology repository should provide. And, you know, BioPortal does that, Ontopede does that, EMBL, OLS does that. And really there's not, you know, those are the ones I go to learn about things. And those are the ones, if I can show scientists, here's the value of dereferencing this term and saying, this is what you mean in your data, this URI. And they go to that URI and they see this representation and the relation, bingo, then they understand the value of semantics.
Okay, thanks everybody. We're right at the very end. We're going to take this right up to the very, very, very end. What I would like to remind everybody of, and then suggest something. The reminder is that this entire effort is now a cluster. Okay, that's one of the things we have achieved in the last, 6 months, is that this entire thing is a cluster now. And, it's a small cluster, very small cluster. I think we've only had maybe 2 or 3 meetings in the last 6 months. Most of what goes on is on GitHub and in the Slack channel, okay? Where I think we could move forward is by inviting, people that are here, Sky, Mark, Simon, maybe Ibrahim, others.
Tools developers that you all know or that we know.
And what we should do is not invite all you guys at the one time. Invite you individually and mine your use. Yeah, we don't want to kill you all at once.
Or if you kill each other.
We'll painfully drag out over a period of 6 months. No, invite you individually and mine your use cases from you and make sure that we're capturing them accurately. That's going to set the basis for, where we go, because it sounds as if we've probably got, another 6 scenarios to contemplate here as to how we grow the service and make it more meaningful. I think this has been very useful. The last 90 minutes has been very useful for me to understand that COR still is a service which has utility. And I think that there's certain, by absolutely no means is this a service that doesn't have existing and potential future usage at the ESIP Federation. Because at the end of the day as well, Annie's here representing the Federation, and it's just nice to see that there is some turnout, some interest to see the ESIP still backs this service as well. Okay, I think we can call it quits. Thank you very much, everybody. Carlos, thank you for joining us online and for dialing in. Very much appreciated.
Thanks for your time.
Okay,
this
folks.
weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Okay.
Thank you for all your hard work on COR.
Yeah.
Everyone loves you for your work.
Everyone
on the
loves you, Carlos.
If you'd be here, we could show you better that we
Yeah.
loved you. So next time
we actually have
want
a
to see you here.
few. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, folks.